Who raised you more? Your parents, your grandparents, or someone else?
I stood behind the curtain of the auditorium stage, my hands clutching a thin blue folder that held a speech I had rewritten and revised maybe 24 times. The principal's voice echoed through the gym, microphone buzzing faintly as he wrapped up the introduction to the ceremony. From where I stood, I could see the entire crowd. The rows of metal bleachers were packed, parents holding handmade signs, siblings yelling names, grandparents clutching camcorders like it was still 1997. Every kid had someone cheering. Every row had movement, pride, people craning their necks to snap photos of their own. And then there was my row, the one labeled Carter, with my seat in the front, completely and utterly empty. Not a single body on my side of the bleachers. Not my mom, who spent 3 hours curling my sister's hair for her 8th grade dance. Not my dad, who used to say he didn't miss games until I started winning things that didn't come with uniforms. And definitely not Camille, my older sister, the golden one, the center of the family orbit since birth. Camille was probably in a robe right now, with cucumbers on her damn eyelids, and mom next to her recording stories for her Instagram, captioned, "Self-Care Saturday with my girl." They were at the spa. I knew this because 10 minutes after I zipped up my gown that morning, a group text had popped up on my phone, one that I hadn't been meant to see. It was meant for Camille from mom. The message read, "Spa day confirmed. Me, Dad, Nana, and Camille. It's her big day. Her influencer deal deserves some celebration. Nail polish. Love you, baby girl." No mention of me. No mention of my name. No one said the word graduation. And even though I stood there with cords across my shoulders and a medal around my neck, it felt like I was wearing nothing at all. That text crushed me. Not in a dramatic, world-ending kind of way, but in that quiet, sour ache that comes when you already knew the truth but hoped you were wrong. My heart didn't break. It hardened. Because this wasn't the first time. When I was 12, I got first place in the district science fair for a project on water contamination. I made a PowerPoint, created a water filter prototype out of recycled plastic, even quoted CDC statistics. Camille got her braces taken off that same day. That evening, when we all sat down to dinner, the conversation never once left her mouth. "Smile again, baby," Mom had said about 30 times. "Show Dad your teeth." I remember sitting there with my certificate, hoping one of them would ask about the ribbon. I remember how loud Camille's chewing sounded next to my silence. That moment never left me. It just sank deeper into my spine with every new one that followed. Camille was the sparkle, the energy, the show. I was just the quiet one, the brain, the reliable daughter who didn't cause problems or ask for much. Teachers loved me. Neighbors complimented me. But inside our house, I barely existed. I made honor roll 9 semesters in a row. Camille got invited to a regional modeling expo once, and the family took a road trip. I got a scholarship letter from Michigan State. Camille got 5,000 followers from a bikini photo. I didn't even bother showing Mom the letter. And it's not like Camille was cruel. She wasn't evil. In fact, that was the hardest part. She always smiled at me. Always acted supportive, but in that fake, syrupy, surface-level way. The kind that meant nothing. She'd leave comments on my school projects like, "So smart," with a sparkle emoji, but when people came over, she introduced me like I was her math tutor. Not her sister. I guess you could say I had spent the last 10 years living next to a spotlight that never once turned my way. So, standing there backstage, watching the crowd buzz with energy, I let myself feel that emptiness in full. Let it fill my lungs like smoke. I didn't cry. I didn't fold. I just stared at that blue folder in my hands, the one with the safe, polished speech inside, the one I was supposed to deliver with poise and grace, thanking everyone and saying all the things I didn't believe anymore. And for the first time in my life, I wondered what would happen if I didn't say what I was supposed to. What if I told the truth? What if I stood up there and didn't perform the good daughter routine? What if I made them feel what I felt for once, even if just for 5 minutes? Because here's the thing no one wants to admit, there's a special kind of loneliness that comes not from being disliked, but from being quietly ignored. When people around you smile and nod and clap at the right moments, but never really see you. When your achievements are noted, but not celebrated. When you're useful, but not valued. Present, but not necessary. Have you ever worked your ass off for something quietly, patiently, only to watch your family skip it like it was a dentist appointment? Have you ever stood in a crowd of people who mattered to others and realized, all at once, that no one you love bothered to show up for you? What would you do if you had a microphone and a captive audience? Would you still thank them? Or would you finally burn the script? That thought simmered as the assistant principal stepped beside me and whispered, "You're up next." I nodded slowly, folding the speech into my hand like it was a napkin and squeezing it until the paper creased deep enough to tear. I wasn't ready. But I had never been readier in my life. The sun was already high by the time I stepped out onto the football field, the plastic chairs arranged in neat little rows like graves, each one bearing a name tag folded in sharp, military-like precision, and mine was right up front, center row. The valedictorian seat, the place of honor, they said, though as I looked around me, with tassels swinging and mothers sobbing 2 rows back from every other graduate, it didn't feel like an honor at all. It felt like I had been positioned, by accident or design, in the most visible possible location to showcase exactly how forgotten I truly was. It wasn't that I expected a marching band or some grand gesture, because I had long since learned to temper my expectations when it came to my family, to teach myself not to hope for things I knew, deep down, would never come, but a part of me, some ragged edge that hadn't yet hardened, still thought there was a chance someone would walk through those gates, even if it was just Mom in her oversized sunglasses, or Dad pretending he hadn't mixed up the time, or even Nana with her embroidered tote bag and a quiet apology. I scanned the bleachers again and again, almost rhythmically, as the national anthem played and the crowd stood, and a few kids near me waved to their families with giddy, shaky hands, and I, despite knowing the answer already, searched that sea of denim and sandals and summer sweat for a familiar face that I never found. My seat remained surrounded by strangers. I remember noticing the woman 3 rows up who brought an air horn that screeched every time her niece's name was mentioned. She wasn't even embarrassed when the principal gave her a sideways glance, because she, unlike me, had people in this crowd who made noise on purpose. I remember the man behind me who stood the moment his son's name was announced and nearly tripped over the row, dropping his phone in the chaos, and I envied that clumsiness, because at least someone cared enough to trip. My moment was coming, they said, and I would have my turn at the microphone, but as each name passed and each cheer rang out, my heart sank deeper beneath the surface, anchoring me to a truth I had been circling around since childhood, that I had done everything right. And still somehow I was not enough to be noticed. The breeze was light but consistent, tugging at the corners of my gown and lifting strands of my hair from my neck, but even nature couldn't shake the weight pressing into my chest when I heard my name called, Melissa Carter, valedictorian, National Honor Society, full scholarship recipient to Michigan State University, and what followed was polite, obligatory applause, the kind people give to strangers at weddings or kids in talent shows who aren't their own. No cheers. No air horn. No dad standing up. Just claps. Unattached, generic claps. And then I saw it, my sister's face, like a ghost slipping through the gates, just late enough to be noticed, but not late enough to be publicly shamed. Camille, walking casually, like the ceremony was an afterthought, like she was stopping by a cookout she barely remembered being invited to. Her platinum hair was curled perfectly, falling in effortless waves down her back. Her makeup was done in that soft, glowy way that made her look permanently kissed by light. And in her hand was a white shopping bag with the logo of a luxury skincare brand I couldn't pronounce. Behind her was my mother, stepping quickly but carefully, holding a water bottle with condensation rolling down the sides and her phone in the other hand, camera already lifted, recording Camille as she smiled and waved to someone I didn't recognize. They didn't even glance toward the student section. They didn't look for me. It hit me then, with such force I had to lower my eyes to keep from physically flinching, that they hadn't come for me, not really. They came because the optics would have been bad if they hadn't. They came because someone, maybe Nana, Maybe Dad had finally said, "Are we really not going to Melissa's graduation?" And the guilt, thin and inconvenient as a mosquito bite, had gotten under their skin just enough to make them drive here after the spa. The image burned in my mind, Camille sipping champagne in a bathrobe while I stood in front of hundreds, preparing to speak without a single person who loved me in the crowd. And still, I sat up straighter. Still, I adjusted my cap and smoothed my gown and reminded myself to breathe, because if I couldn't have their applause, I'd have their attention, even if only for 5 minutes. As the last name was called and the ceremony moved toward its closing moments, my heart began pounding in that too loud way, the kind where you wonder if people nearby can hear it. I reached for the folder in my lap and opened it to the speech I had written, the one filled with gratitude and polish and all the predictable quotes about hard work and future dreams. My hands trembled as I turned the page, trying to focus on the lines I'd rehearsed in the mirror, the ones Mr. Bailey had read and smiled at so proudly. I could see him now, 2 rows down from the stage, his eyes already on me, the corners of his mouth lifting when I looked back at him. He nodded once, not rushed or urgent, but in that quiet way good teachers do when they know what you're capable of, and they're just waiting for you to realize it too. And I almost stood. Almost rose from my chair and took my steps toward the podium. But instead, I looked up straight at Camille, now seated next to Mom, her legs crossed, still scrolling through her phone, and I saw her laugh at something, tossing her hair back just slightly, as if nothing about today belonged to anyone but her. That was the moment I knew. I wouldn't read that speech. I wouldn't waste my breath thanking people who hadn't shown up for me when it mattered. I wouldn't stand there and pretend. Because if they weren't going to remember this moment for the pride they should have felt, I'd make damn sure they remembered it for the silence that followed. The kind of silence that doesn't come from shyness or fear, but from fire. From the decision to stand up and be seen, not in the way they wanted, but in the way I needed. So I reached down, folded the speech once, then again, until it was small enough to vanish into my palm, and I held it there, waiting for the principal to say my name. Waiting to burn the script with nothing but truth. There's a strange kind of silence that overtakes a stadium right before someone is handed a microphone, not the kind of silence that feels peaceful or respectful, but the thick, watchful kind. Like every pair of eyes in the place has narrowed their focus down to a single point, waiting not out of reverence, but out of habit, unsure yet whether what comes next will be worth their attention, or something to politely clap for and then forget by dinner. I felt that silence descend around me as the principal cleared his throat, adjusted his glasses, and announced my name to the crowd, Melissa Carter, our class valedictorian. He said with all the enthusiasm of a man who had given the same speech 12 years in a row, and as I stood, my feet stiff inside heels I hadn't broken in, the folder still clenched in one hand, I took a breath that didn't settle in my lungs, and I walked. The steps to the podium felt longer than they should have, not physically, but emotionally, like each footfall was pulling me through wet cement, through years of being overlooked. Through every moment I had quietly told myself it was okay to be forgotten as long as I didn't cause trouble. I reached the microphone, adjusted it the way Mr. Bailey had taught us, cleared my throat softly, and paused not because I didn't know what to say, but because I needed them to feel the weight of that pause, to recognize, if only for a few seconds, that this was no longer just another student going through the motions. My eyes scanned the crowd in one deliberate sweep, passing over familiar strangers and unfamiliar supporters, until they landed exactly where I knew they would, on Camille, who was now sitting with her legs crossed, sunglasses perched high on her head like a crown. Her phone resting in her lap as if even here, even now, she might need to reply to someone more important. Mom sat beside her, her mouth frozen in a tight line, neither smiling nor frowning, just watching me the way one might watch a performer at a play they didn't understand, invested enough to remain seated, but too distant to feel anything real. I thought I would feel rage then. I thought I'd feel sadness. But what I felt instead was something quieter, something steadier, the calm, sharp edge of resolve. I took the folded speech from my hand, unfolded it once, stared at the words I'd written, the cliches, the metaphors, the lines about gratitude and resilience, and then, in front of hundreds, I folded it again. And then again. And with one slow, intentional movement, I placed it on the podium beside me and spoke words I had not written, not practiced, not polished, but had been carrying for years. I was going to say something different, I began, and even I was surprised by how steady my voice sounded, how still my hands were as they rested on either side of the microphone. I had written a speech about success and about pushing through hard times and about how proud I am to be standing here today. And all of that would have been true. But I think the truth deserves more than well-crafted sentences and pretty quotes. A murmur moved through the crowd, subtle but undeniable. I saw Mr. Bailey in the front, his expression unreadable, but his hands clasped tightly in front of him. I continued. This is a ceremony meant to celebrate achievement. It's meant to honor the long nights, the missed parties, the quiet mornings where we studied instead of sleeping in. It's for the ones who gave up comfort for consistency. And there are students here today who will hear their name called and be met with screams and signs and people who showed up for them in every sense of the word. And that's beautiful. That's how it should be. I paused then, my throat tightening just slightly, but I pushed through it because I had come too far to turn back now. But there are also students who sat in this stadium today with empty seats in their section. Students who got the grades, who earned the awards, who gave everything they had, and still walked into this field knowing no one would be here to see it. And to those students, I want to say this: you are not invisible. You are not less worthy because the people who should have cheered for you chose to look elsewhere. Your work still matters. Your effort still counts. Your voice, even if no one clapped for it, still deserves to be heard. The silence that followed was different than before. It wasn't expectant anymore. It was alive, heavy, hanging in the air like mist after a storm. And still, I kept going. I spent a lot of my time in high school wondering what was wrong with me. Why my achievements were never enough to pull focus. Why my name only echoed in this building, but never in my own house. I thought if I just did more, achieved more, was quieter, sharper, more obedient, eventually someone would notice. Eventually, they'd be proud. I could see Camille now, her posture a little less perfect, the sunglasses no longer on her head but in her hand, twisting slowly between her fingers. Mom was watching me, her lips pressed tighter than before, her shoulders stiff like someone waiting for the punchline of a joke they didn't understand. But sometimes, you learn the hard way that not everyone is capable of seeing you, not because you're not worth seeing, but because their attention was never yours to begin with. And when that happens, you have a choice. You can shrink or you can speak. So this, I said, gesturing to the mic, is me choosing to speak. There was no applause yet. Just stillness. I don't need a sign in the crowd to know I've earned this moment. I don't need a photo op or a stage smile or a hashtag. What I need, what we all need, is to remember that the value of what we've done doesn't decrease just because the people we hoped would care didn't. Finally, I let my voice soften, the way one does when they are no longer trying to prove anything, just trying to say something true. So to the students sitting with no one in the bleachers, I see you. And to the ones who did it anyway, despite the silence, despite the absence, despite the ache, I hope you see yourselves. Because you did it. We did it. And we did it without them. I stepped back from the microphone. There was a heartbeat of complete, frozen quiet. And then, the crowd erupted. Not polite clapping. Not the automatic kind of applause people give because it's the right thing to do. But real, pulsing, foot-stomping noise, a roar of reaction that moved like a wave through the stadium, and for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like a placeholder or a shadow, or the girl whose sister always got the good side of the spotlight. I felt seen. Not just by strangers, but by myself. I looked toward Camille one last time, and her face told me everything I needed to know. She had heard me, and she didn't know what to do with it. The crowd had started to break apart by the time I made it down the stage steps, and the once neat formation of chairs and structured rows gave way to the chaos of bodies pressing against each other, arms flying up in search of group photos, mortarboards sailing through the air in clumsy arcs, and the kind of loud, unfiltered joy that only comes when something long and painful is finally over. I moved slowly through it all, Not because I wanted to savor the moment, but because there was no one waiting for me, no one pulling me into a hug or waving me over with that breathless urgency you see in movies. There were just faces I vaguely recognized from class, most of them clustered around their own families, their own circles, their own celebrations, and I became, once again, what I had always been in this town, the background character. Except this time, they were all looking at me. And not in the way I was used to, not like they had heard I was smart or reliable or some teacher's favorite, but like I had taken something they hadn't even realized they cared about and forced them to pay attention. It was a strange kind of power, the way people kept stopping to say that speech, wow, with a hesitance in their voice like they weren't sure if they were supposed to be congratulating me or apologizing for something they had never admitted to doing. Some students I hadn't spoken to in years reached out, almost shyly, their compliments clumsy and genuine, and Mr. Bailey, when he finally reached me, just smiled with his eyes damp, pulled me into a tight hug, and whispered, "I knew you had it in you," before stepping back and disappearing into the crowd with the kind of grace only someone who really sees you can pull off without fanfare. But it wasn't any of them I was looking for. It was her. And as if summoned by the sheer force of tension that had been building in my chest since the moment I saw her waltz into the ceremony with her sunglasses and her spa bag, Camille appeared at the edge of the parking lot, walking toward me with a kind of fury she didn't bother disguising. Her heels clicked against the pavement in sharp, impatient rhythms, her perfect curls beginning to fray just slightly at the edges, and her face, usually so curated, so camera-ready, looked raw in a way I'd never seen before. Behind her, my mother followed, still clutching her phone as if unsure whether she should be recording this or pretending it wasn't happening at all. Camille didn't stop until she was directly in front of me, standing close enough that I could see the fine shimmer of highlighter on her cheekbones and the small crack in her lip gloss from where she'd probably bitten down during my speech. She didn't waste time with greetings or soft introductions. "What the hell was that?" she snapped, her voice low enough to avoid drawing attention, but sharp enough to slice through the noise of the parking lot like a whip. "You embarrassed Mom. You embarrassed the whole family." And I laughed. Not out of amusement, but out of disbelief, out of the kind of stunned, hollow shock that hits you when someone walks into your fire and accuses you of starting smoke. "Did I?" I asked, tilting my head slightly, keeping my tone level because I had learned, over years of silence, that nothing unsettles people more than when you don't rise to meet their volume. Because I thought I said exactly what needed to be said. And judging by the crowd, they agreed. "You made it sound like we didn't care about you," she hissed, eyes narrowing. "Like we just ignored you your whole life." "You didn't ignore me," I corrected, and I felt the anger begin to uncoil inside me, not wild or reckless, but focused and cold and long overdue. "You overlooked me. You minimized me. You treated everything I did like it was a side note to whatever you were doing. And you convinced yourselves that because I didn't make noise, because I didn't demand the attention, it meant I didn't need it." Camille's lips parted, and for a second I saw it, the crack in her confidence, the tiny fracture in the wall she'd built around herself that protected her from having to question her own role in the family's hierarchy. But then she recovered, as she always did, leaning into that defiant, performative concern. "I didn't ask for that," she said, quieter now. "I didn't ask to be the center of attention." "No," I said, my voice flattening, "you didn't ask. But you never once stepped aside, either. You never once said, 'Melissa deserves this one.' You never once noticed how every celebration became yours, how every success I had turned into a footnote under your shadow." And that was when Mom stepped in, finally, like she'd decided she'd allowed enough honesty for one afternoon. Her voice came from behind Camille's shoulder, trembling with a mixture of indignation and confusion. "This isn't the time for this," she said, raising her hand slightly, as if waving away the confrontation like a bad smell. "You're making a scene." "No," I said calmly, turning toward her. "I made a statement. Back there on that stage. And now I'm making a choice, to stop pretending like this dynamic hasn't been strangling me for years." Mom's face fell in on itself, that carefully cultivated expression of maternal grace, slipping away to reveal what had always been underneath, an exhausted woman more invested in appearances than substance, more interested in keeping the peace than acknowledging the war that had been waging quietly for years beneath her roof. She didn't respond, just stared at me, lips pressed together, eyes glassy with something that might have been guilt or embarrassment, or maybe just the realization that for once, she wasn't in control of the narrative. Camille stepped back then, her arms folded across her chest, her mouth twisting into something that wanted to be anger, but fell short. "So what now?" she asked. "You get to be the victim?" The misunderstood genius. I shook my head slowly, the words forming without hesitation, because they had been waiting for years. "No," I said. "I'm not a victim. I'm just finally done being quiet. I'm done letting all of you write the story while I play a background character in my own life." There was nothing left to say after that. Not really. And so I walked past them, leaving my sister standing in the hot summer air with the weight of my words clinging to her skin like humidity, and my mother frozen in place with her phone still in her hand, the red light blinking slowly, as if she had been recording and hadn't even realized it. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't cinematic. But it was honest. And for once, that was enough. The house was quiet when I stepped through the front door, the kind of quiet that doesn't feel peaceful or comforting, but cold and unfamiliar, like the air itself is holding its breath, unsure whether to welcome you back or remind you that you were never really expected in the first place. The lights in the hallway had been left on, the soft yellow glow making everything look oddly theatrical, like a stage that had been abandoned mid-performance, and I stood there for a moment, just inside the threshold, the graduation gown still clinging to my body, heavy with sweat and hours of unspoken things that had finally found their voice. I didn't call out. I didn't drop my bag or take off my shoes or try to fill the silence with the usual noises of arrival, because I wasn't here to slip back into the rhythm of the household. I was here to feel what it meant to be in this space, without pretending it was something it had never been. The living room still smelled faintly of the vanilla candle Mom liked to burn during the afternoons, and on the kitchen counter sat a cluster of empty glasses, half-melted ice floating in the bottoms, remnants of whatever quick drinks they'd poured before rushing out to Camille's spa day. There was no sign that anyone had planned to celebrate me. No banner, no card, not even one of those pre-packaged congratulatory cupcakes from the grocery store bakery that always came with too much frosting and a plastic pick stabbed into the top. I walked through the room slowly, almost absently, my fingers grazing the backs of chairs and picture frames, wondering how many years I'd spent walking this same route, hoping, on some level, to find some sign that I was seen, that I mattered in this place. And realizing now that the only thing that had changed between then and now was that I no longer needed the sign, I had created my own. Not for them, not for approval, but for me, to prove that I could exist loudly without waiting for permission. In the kitchen, I opened the fridge, pulled out a box of leftover pizza, 2 slices, pepperoni, cold and stiff in the way day-old pizza always is, and I ate standing up, not because I was in a rush, but because I didn't feel like pretending this deserved a formal meal. My phone buzzed once in my pocket. Then again. Then 3 more times, notifications piling on top of each other like debris in a storm. I finally pulled it out, and for a moment I just stared at the screen, watching the numbers climb, messages from people I barely knew, classmates, distant cousins, people from my AP history class, and my job at the bookstore. Some had sent screenshots, others full paragraphs. The video of my speech had been recorded, posted, shared, and was already climbing its way through feeds and timelines with captions like, "The valedictorian speech everyone needs to hear," and "This girl just exposed every toxic family in 5 minutes." I should have felt vindicated. I should have felt triumphant. And in a way, I did, not in the arrogant, chest-puffing sense, but in the quiet, measured awareness that I had finally said what needed to be said, and the world, for once, had listened. But alongside that feeling came something else, something heavier, a weight that settled just beneath my ribs and pulsed with a familiar ache, the knowledge that the people I most needed to understand my words were likely the ones who would dismiss them entirely, or worse, hear them and still choose to stay unchanged. I scrolled through the messages until I found one that wasn't from a stranger, a voice memo. No subject line, no context, just a red circle and a timestamp from Camille. I hesitated. Then I pressed play. The first thing I heard was breath, not speech, not an explanation or an apology or even a lashing out, just ragged, uneven breathing, the kind that sounded like someone trying very hard not to fall apart in a public place. Then a sniff, the unmistakable sound of someone swallowing emotion that had climbed too far up the throat to be held back. No words. No attempt at crafting something eloquent or clever. Just raw, unedited vulnerability. I listened to the full minute and 43 seconds. I didn't save it. I didn't reply. I deleted it without thinking, not out of cruelty, but out of self-preservation, because I knew what would happen if I let it live too long on my phone. I would start to doubt, to soften, to wonder if maybe she had tried in her own way. And I wasn't ready to let myself believe that yet, not when the memory of every moment she took center stage while I stood just out of frame was still so fresh in my mind. I took a shower after that, washing off the sweat and the heat and the traces of expectation that still clung to my skin. The steam filled the small bathroom until the mirror fogged completely, and when I stepped out, towel wrapped tight around my chest, I wiped a circle into the glass and stared at my reflection, not to check my appearance or adjust my hair, but to look myself in the eye in a way I had never dared to before. What I saw surprised me. There was no girl trying to be good enough. No daughter waiting to be seen. No sister cowering under the shadow of a crown she never asked to compete against. There was just me, Melissa Carter. Graduate. Valedictorian. Survivor of the kind of family love that asks you to shrink in exchange for peace. And I looked at that face, that expression stripped of fear and guilt and performance, and I said, aloud and without hesitation, damn right I made them listen. The words echoed slightly, bouncing off tile and porcelain, and I stood there for a moment longer, letting them hang in the air, letting them settle inside me like an anchor. Because I wasn't just proud of the speech I gave, or the way people responded to it. I was proud of the decision to stop waiting for the applause I was never going to get, and instead give it to myself. That night, I lay in bed not expecting anything, not anticipating a knock on my door or a late-night apology or a shift in the family dynamic that had ruled my life for so long. The truth was, I didn't know what would happen next. Maybe nothing would change. Maybe everything would. Maybe Camille would come to understand the depth of what I said, or maybe she would dig in deeper, painting me as the bitter one, the one who ruined a picture-perfect day with her bitterness and nerve. But for once, I didn't need to know the answer. For once, the power wasn't in being right, or being loved, or even being heard. It was in knowing I had spoken anyway. You don't have to scream to be heard. You don't need a crowd to be worthy. And sometimes, the real victory isn't making them understand, it's standing up, speaking your truth, and letting the silence that follows do the rest.